Food Insecurity and Learning at Ozarks Technical Community College by Marilee Kohout. Throughout this course, the scholar practitioner learned the elements of design thinking process, which will be the foundation of the problem of practice for Lindenwood's educational doctorate in leadership. According to the Interaction Design Foundation, the design thinking process is a nonlinear and continual process which emphasizes the importance of collaboration between the end user and the scholar practitioner. The focus is on creating a solution to a societal concern. This process consists of 5 stages: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. The following information defining the different stages is from the Interaction Design Foundation, as referenced in the resources at the end of the presentation. Empathy, the first step in the design thinking process, focuses on the end user. The design thinking process is meant to be human-centric, and so the empathy stage is focused on setting aside biases and gathering information from stakeholders so the scholar practitioner can gain insight into what the end user needs. As stated in the article, More Than Simply Doing Good, the definition of changemaker, a scholar practitioner cannot simply descend into a community and assume what the community needs. It is critical, therefore, for the scholar practitioner to ask questions and gather information. The second step in the design thinking process is the define phase. During this phase, the scholar practitioner will evaluate the information gathered during the empathy phase to define the issue's central problem. Defining the problem clearly is what allows the scholar practitioner to move into the next phase, which is the ideate phase. During the ideate phase, the focus is to generate as many ideas as possible. To accomplish this, you must generate ideas without assigning judgment to them. Some of the methods Career Foundry suggests for the ideation phase are brainstorming, analogies, brainwriting, challenging assumptions, etc. Finally, it is the job of the scholar practitioner to decide what ideas carry the most weight and show the most potential for turning into a prototype. In this next stage, the prototype stage, the scholar practitioner takes the best ideas from the ideation phase and creates a prototype meant to be tested by the researchers and end users. Finally, there is a test phase of the design thinking process. During this phase, the scholar practitioner, with the aid of the end user ideally, will test the prototype to determine what changes need to be made before it is ultimately implemented. While the test phase is technically the final stage of the process, the design thinking process is not linear, and therefore this test phase could send the scholar practitioner back to any of the previous stages to continue to refine the process. In their article, Going Without, an exploration of food and housing insecurity among undergraduates, researchers Broughton and Goldrick-Rab asserted half of students in both 2- and 4-year colleges experience food insecurity. According to researchers Wood and Harris, who wrote the article Experiences with Acute Food Insecurity Among College Students, Black and multi-ethnic students are at the highest risk for experiencing food insecurity. The researchers concluded housing insecurity, legal troubles, and ensuing health issues were external indicators of students who are experiencing food insecurity. Therefore, identifying and helping to address these issues can help treat the issue of food insecurity holistically. The national data is consistent with what the Office of Institutional Research at Ozarks Technical Community College, moving forward to be referred to as OTC, found to be true of students attending the institution. Data posted on OTC's Data on Demand website, March 15, 2023, showed 53% of OTC students worried food would run out before the student would be able to purchase more. Through this data, the scholar practitioner was made aware of the acute nature of the issue of food insecurity at OTC. According to a study done at a metropolitan university in Brisbane, Australia, of the 810 students at the school who reported a lack of resources, specifically food insecurity, 80% reported this lack of resources contributed to poor educational performance. In speaking with one of OTC's advisors, Kalia Airy, the scholar practitioner learned the advisor's students often say when students are struggling with access to resources, the students end up having to choose between providing for themselves and their families and attending college. Naturally, education usually must be compromised so basic needs can be provided for. The responsibility on the scholar practitioner will be to determine how the food insecurity is currently being addressed at OTC and whether the data shows the current response is sufficient to ensure students are able to access educational opportunities. Per the Interaction Design Foundation, the empathy phase is focused on the end user. The goal is to find out from the end user what the needs are so the scholar practitioner can identify what the central issue is and address it with a prototype. During this phase, the scholar practitioner interviewed 3 OTC employees who work directly with students. The first person the scholar practitioner interviewed was Sarah Bargo, College Director of Student Care and Engagement. At OTC, there is a system called OTC Cares, where employees and faculty can report concerns for students facing non-academic challenges. Food insecurity is one of the concerns employees and faculty members can report. Bargo's job entails reviewing all OTC Cares reports and assigning each case to a community resource specialist, who then connects students to resources within the greater Springfield community. The next interviewee was Kalia Airy, a college navigator, which is OTC's title for advisors. Airy is responsible for 600 students in the OTC Technical Education Department. Finally, the scholar practitioner interviewed Abby Ray Hicks, who is an adjunct instructor in the Political Science Department. Since the scholar practitioner works closely with all 3 of these individuals, the introductions were simple. The scholar practitioner explained the concept of design thinking and explained the final project for the Principles of Design Thinking course. It was easy to establish rapport because the scholar practitioner works very closely with all 3 of these individuals. However, the biggest point of connection is both the interviewees and scholar practitioner are student-facing, and so the understanding of the situation is more personal. All 3 of the interviewees said they see food insecurity as a significant issue at OTC. The greatest concern Airy expressed was a lack of resources to meet the needs of students, while Bargo said she feels the college does a good job of connecting with community resources so the college is not duplicating services which already exist. Bargo does, however, acknowledge there are some gaps in service. For instance, only 2 campuses out of the 3 campuses and 3 centers have community food pantries come to visit on a regular basis. One of the most surprising things Bargo noted was how students often do not follow up on requests for resources. She said, quote, "I am often challenged and surprised by how often we offer support, and they don't take us up on our offer. I don't have data on the reason why, so I can only speak anecdotally, but we suspect it has to do with the stigmatization of asking for help, especially if it has to do with mental health." End quote. Finally, all 3 felt there was a correlation between poor performance in class and a lack of resources through their evidence, though their evidence was anecdotal and not based on data. Another step in the empathy phase was to observe students during Eagle Breakfast, a free breakfast OTC offers to students daily. Offering Eagle Breakfast is one way in which OTC is already trying to address food insecurity. The scholar practitioner chose to pursue naturalistic observation, which, according to the Interaction Design Foundation, is best if the scholar practitioner wants students to behave naturally. If students felt they were being observed, it could lead to an alteration in their behavior. The scholar practitioner was committed to observing an authentic student experience. One of the first things the scholar practitioner noted was how students were clearly excited about the Eagle Breakfast program. There was no sense of shame or stigma surrounding being in the line for the free breakfast. Part of this could be due to this service being offered broadly. No one must show proof of the need to access this service, so standing in line does not highlight students as being in need. It allows for a certain amount of anonymity as students access this service. Though this cannot be corroborated without speaking directly to students, this was the conclusion the scholar practitioner reached based on observation. The next thing noted by the scholar practitioner was how the line served as a form of community. Students stood together with friends or chatted with the person in line next to them. No one was othered for being in line to get free food. They were all simply students equally accessing a service provided by the college. In order to keep students from recognizing they were being observed and thereby risking a shift in the students' behavior, the scholar practitioner moved to the atrium, a large seating area for students, to continue the observation. Many students brought their free breakfast into the atrium to eat. Many sat and ate with friends, continuing the community building from the line, while others chose to eat alone as they prepared for the day ahead. If given the opportunity, the scholar practitioner would want to observe Eagle Breakfast on more than one occasion. It would also be useful to see how students behaved in classes on days they did not access the breakfast versus how they behave on the days they do access Eagle breakfast. As a final part of the empathy phase, the scholar practitioner created an empathy map. According to Dr. Linda Levitt in our course module, an empathy map is a way to organize what the end user says, does, thinks, and feels about the problem for which the scholar practitioner is creating a solution. The purpose of an empathy map in the context of this project is for the scholar practitioner to connect more deeply with the needs and concerns of the end user. It is crucial for this connection to take place so the project remains human-centric and end-user focused. As the scholar practitioner moved from the empathy to the define phase, the define phase being the phase within which the scholar practitioner defines the central problem of the issue, the scholar practitioner engaged in affinity mapping. This was a process where, during a timed period of 10 minutes, the scholar practitioner listed as many possible ideas related to the topic of food insecurity at OTC as possible. The practice of affinity mapping helped the scholar practitioner define the central issue at OTC. Ultimately, the central issue is most of the resources are dependent on community connections. While these community resources are valuable and can fill gaps in OTC's ability to address resource issues, they are not within OTC's ability to control. According to data provided by the OTC Data on Demand dashboard, 53% of students at OTC experience food insecurity. With over half of OTC students experiencing a lack of resources, for OTC to serve their purpose of educating these students, OTC needs to address barriers to success in ways the college can oversee. Based on the problem as defined, the name of the scholar practitioner's project is as follows: Food Insecurity and Learning at Ozarks Technical Community College. As previously mentioned, the focus of the ideation phase is to generate as many ideas as possible. To accomplish this, it is crucial to focus on quantity and not quality of ideas. Once ideas have been generated through various brainstorming methods, it is the job of the scholar practitioner to decide which ideas carry the most weight and show the most potential for turning into a prototype. In order to generate as many ideas as possible, the scholar practitioner engaged in a group brainstorming session. In total, there were 4 participants, including the scholar practitioner. The scholar practitioner was the only participant working directly in higher education. However, 2 of the participants work for an organization affiliated with Oklahoma State University. The final participant worked with Citibank. All participants were innovative thinkers and problem solvers as a part of their profession. The scholar practitioner believed this would be an asset during an activity like this. The scholar practitioner also thought it would be beneficial to get perspectives from outside of higher education. Sometimes it takes an objective third party to see things clearly. Maintaining the energy throughout the session was not something the scholar practitioner had to do. The energy was high from the very start of the session. The only hindrance to the progression of the brainstorming session was the poor internet connection at the beginning. The participants met with the scholar practitioner via FaceTime, while all participants also used Jamboard as a way of writing down ideas. Once all participants switched off their cameras on FaceTime, the session was able to progress without any interruption. At the end of the session, one of the participants remarked it was beneficial to work in a group because people were able to build momentum off each other's energy. In the future, the scholar practitioner would opt to use something other than Jamboard. The group could have generated more ideas if there had been more space, but the whiteboard was a very limited space. Also, in the future, the scholar practitioner would opt for an in-person meeting if possible. To determine what would be most feasible, what the most feasible ideas were, the scholar practitioner evaluated which ideas could leverage existing OTC resources and had the most potential for sustainability and longevity. At this point in the design thinking process, the scholar practitioner identified the following ideas as showing the most promise: an on-campus food pantry by applying for grants meant to address food insecurity, and partnering with the on-campus cafe and asking the manager to give away leftover food at the end of the day to students in need. These ideas seemed the most feasible because they would be leveraging resources already available at OTC and utilizing the space OTC already has. An idea which was immediately discarded was the idea of partnering with local restaurants, as this would be difficult and complicated. and once again would have OTC relying on outside resources. For the ideation step, the scholar practitioner found timed brainstorming sessions in groups to be the most useful. The timed nature of the session forced the group to focus, which meant more ideas were generated in less time because there was a sense of urgency. Also, working in a group with individuals both in and outside of the field of higher education allowed for a much more diverse set of ideas to be generated. Finally, focusing on the idea of quantity over quality proved to be extremely useful. As Hastings asserts in the video Design Thinking, Ideate, approaching each brainstorming session with the mindset to generate as many ideas as possible without assigning judgment to the ideas in the moment was the most helpful because it meant there was more freedom to think creatively. The scholar practitioner will look for ways to incorporate group brainstorming activities like this in all future projects. The next stage is the prototype stage. A prototype is a model of your solution based on the data gathered from previous stages of the design thinking process. Per Gallagher and Thordarson's book, Design Thinking in Play, prototypes are relevant, rapid, and rough. This means the idea of a prototype is not to be perfect, but rather to be a rapid and crude representation of the solution to the issue. There are two types of prototypes. The first is a high-fidelity prototype. Per the Interaction Design Foundation, a high-fidelity prototype is much more complex and closer to the finished product. An example of a high-fidelity prototype would be an interactive 3D plastic model. The second type of prototype is a low-fidelity model. A low-fidelity prototype is basic and does not necessarily have all the features of a final product. However, the benefit of this type of model is it is quick and simple to make. It is easier to make changes as the scholar practitioner enters the testing phase. And, as mentioned previously, per Gallagher and Thordarson, a low-fidelity prototype is relevant, rapid, and rough. For this project, the scholar practitioner decided to move forward with the idea of a full-time food pantry on campus. The reason this prototype was chosen is because it seems to be the most feasible of all the ideas generated during the ideation phase. A space will soon be opening on OTC's campus, big enough to facilitate a full-time food pantry. The space is currently being used for the bookstore, so it has a good layout for a food pantry. When creating a low-fidelity prototype, the scholar practitioner decided to use a sort of storyboard to provide a visual representation of what the full-time food pantry would look like. For reference, the scholar practitioner included images from the University of Iowa's full-time on-campus food pantry. The idea is to set the food pantry up to look like a grocery store. Setting the space up to look like a store will make the experience more enjoyable for students utilizing the service and will remove some of the stigma associated with needing to frequent a food pantry. Currently, OTC partners with community food pantries. This means access to food pantry services is limited, not only in terms of scheduling, but also in terms of how many students can have nutritional needs met. Having a full-time food pantry on campus allows students constant and consistent access to the food the students need to be successful at a higher education institution. The scholar practitioner's classmates brought up a good point when asking how OTC would find a consistent supplier for the food pantry. While applying for grants to help get the food pantry set up and stocked at the beginning is a good idea, there needs to be other plans to make sure the food pantry is always stocked. The scholar practitioner concluded OTC will have to leverage more than one connection to ensure a consistent supply of food for the food pantry. One of the ideas the scholar practitioner generated regarding maintaining food pantry supply is to have frequent food drives. Food drives would give the OTC staff, faculty, and student population a chance to be involved in addressing the food insecurity issues present in the college community. Another idea would be to partner with local grocery stores and businesses who might want to get involved in the effort to help address food insecurity for OTC students. The feedback provided by classmates helped the scholar practitioner focus on the longevity of the proposed prototype. While getting things started is an important part, the prototype will not be a good solution to the issue of food insecurity if there is not a plan to sustain the full-time food pantry on campus. The feedback was also a reminder to the scholar practitioner to include more people in helping point out potential flaws in the prototype. More perspectives will illuminate more potential barriers, so barriers can be addressed as the prototype is refined. Through these activities and discussions, the scholar practitioner learned the prototyping phase requires a lot of refinement. Prototypes are rough drafts of what will eventually be used as a solution to address the problem of food insecurity on campus. After considering the feedback, both from classmates and Dr. Levitt, the scholar practitioner decided the following null hypothesis would be the most fitting for this project. There is no relationship between the number of times students have accessed the food pantry and students' achievement measured by an increase in GPA at the end of the semester. As a part of the implementation process, the scholar practitioner will be engaging OTC's Office of Student Care and Engagement, Grants Department, and the OTC staff and faculty at large. The full-time food pantry will need to fall under a specific department, which will oversee maintaining its function. The reason it will fall under Student Care and Engagement is because, as previously mentioned, this department is responsible for tracking OTC CARES reports and the community resource specialists who address issues like food insecurity, amongst other things. The grants team will be instrumental in gathering funds to implement the initial changes in the former bookstore so it can house the food pantry. The grants team will also help secure funds for the initial stocking of the store. Finally, the OTC staff and faculty will be asked to routinely be involved in food drives. This practice will help secure long-term provisions for the food pantry and will also create buy-in from those most involved in the care of students. As the scholar practitioner is investigating the null hypothesis mentioned above, it will be crucial to ask first, how will having access to a full-time food pantry improve student performance as measured by GPA, attendance, and graduation? As this research question is quantitative in nature, the data will be gathered using OTC's research department, which accesses student records through our student information system, Colleague. The system already tracks data like graduation rates, GPA, and attendance. The research team would simply be looking at this information both before and after the food pantry on campus is created on campus. Since the food pantry will require a student ID, OTC will be able to track who is accessing this service on OTC's campus. Then the research team will be able to compare the information OTC has for this student before and after accessing the food pantry. Second, it will be important for the scholar practitioner to consider the following. How will having access to a full-time food pantry improve overall student satisfaction with their college experience at OTC? For a qualitative research question like this one, data would be measured through a survey of students who are in their final semester at OTC. This survey would ask students questions about whether the services offered on campus met their needs while the students were students at OTC. The scholar practitioner will need consent to participate from students for the survey. The scholar practitioner would, as a part of the survey, include a section explaining why students are being asked to participate in the survey. It would also have a section explaining exactly how the data will be used and to what end. The students will be able to check a box indicating the students understand why and how the data will be used and consent to the information being used in this way. Once the data has been gathered, the scholar practitioner will do a comparative analysis. By looking at the students' performance before and after the creation of the food pantry, the scholar practitioner will be able to determine whether there is a direct correlation between the food pantry and retention rates, academic performance, and graduation rates. As the semester draws to a close, the most important takeaways for the scholar practitioner have been the following. First, good ideation and problem solving needs to be non-discriminatory. Nothing is a bad idea, at least at first. Finally, the design thinking process is not linear. The idea is that a solution is never final. Whether it's changes in the field or simply the emergence of new data, a solution may always need to be amended to better fit the problem. So, the scholar practitioner is learning to hold the idea of a solution loosely and always be open to change.